An eight-figure sales team isn't just a group of high performers. It's a real tangible system. And if your sales team still runs on talent, hustle, and good vibes, you'll never scale predictably. So in this video, I'll break down exactly what an eight-figure sales team actually looks like structurally, operationally, and also financially. And my hope is by the end of this video, I've given you at least a golden nugget here or there that you can go out and build your very own high performance sales team. Now, the first thing we kind of have to look at here are the four core functions of a sales team. And in order for us to do that, we're gonna have to hop right into the iPad so I can visually show you what these four functions look like. So essentially the first core function of a high-performing sales team is going to be your setters, right? I cannot stress how important this is, and I still cannot believe in this day and age that, businesses that run call funnels that do not have setters are burning through their leads, right? If you think about it, right? If you take an average of, let's just say that your VSL converts at 20%, right? Which is pretty darn good, right? My question to you, as always, is what happens to the remaining 80% of the leads that did not go ahead and book a call, right? This is exactly where setters come in. And what they're gonna do is revive those leads that actually did not go ahead and book a call, right? They're actually gonna qualify them. And for those people that did not actually show up to the call, well, guess what? They're gonna create that follow-up sequence, right? And they're actually going to re-engage those leads to make sure that they get rebooked on the closer's calendar. So important, and in my opinion, the most basically overlooked role in a sales teams are setters, right? So important that you have setters on your team. Now, the next element that you need on your sales team is obviously closers, right? What happens to the actual leads that, do go through from the setters, right? And they do qualify them, well, they get passed on to the closers, right? And the closers are going to convert them and basically close them. Now, the next function is going to be your sales manager, right? And a sales manager is basically going to be enforcing standards. They're going to run team, reviews. They're going to go through call reviews. They're going to be making sure that everybody, is taken care of on the sales team in terms of, tech stack familiarity and so on and so forth. Basically, the sales manager oversees all of the sales. And if you are doing, generally under $100,000 a month, well, you as a founder are probably the sales manager as well, which again brings me to the final core element here, which is the founder, right? So specifically the founder, right, should not be involved in the day-to-day, but rather you should be on top of the business, growing the business from a 30,000 foot perspective, right? Because again, a key element that you have to remember here is you don't want to build an army of closers before you have setters and systems in place, right? Because if you go ahead and build an army of closers, and I know I'm getting a little bit off topic here, but this is something that jumped to my mind, which is really important, is that I've seen founders go ahead and just build the biggest and baddest closing team ever. Well, guess what? If your systems aren't set up to handle the volume that's going to come in, right? Because if you're hiring more closers, you're expecting more volume. And in addition, if your closers do not have the support that they need, well, guess what? Things are going to crumble, right? And that's why it's always important, going back to setters and closers, if I've always been asked, what is the ratio of setters to closers, right? Should you have, 2 setters to 1 closer or 1 setter to 2 closers? My opinion, right, and what I have seen work best is a 1-to-1 ratio. 1 setter, 1 closer. Why? Because it's very efficient, it's easy to scale, and simplicity scales, right? When you have, multiple closers working with 1 setter or multiple setters working with, 1 closer, it becomes a little bit more complicated to scale, okay? Now, the second part to all of this is actually sourcing, right? And how you hire makes or breaks everything, and this is so important, and founders skip over the hiring process and the recruiting process so quickly and so easily, and then they wonder why they always get the bad talent or the bad reps to sell for them, right? Or why everybody cannot perform like their top performer. It's because of the actual sourcing part and how they hire, right? I mean, think about it. You don't build a Ferrari with junkyard parts, right? You're gonna go to the dealership and get the very best parts for that Ferrari, right? Now, most sales teams fail specifically because they hire based on energy instead of proof, right? I cannot actually explain to you how many times I talk to closers and founders, and basically the founders will tell me, I'll ask them, how many times did you interview them? What was the process like? And it stuns me when they say, oh yeah, I just posted an ad on a job board, interviewed this guy, one interview, and hired him. I cannot, and then they come to me and they wonder why, their sales team isn't scaling or why they have a bad sales team. It's because they're not spending enough time hiring, recruiting, vetting the actual person who's going to be representing their brand. At the end of the day, closers and setters represent your brand to your potential and future customers, right? So it's so important that you put the best foot forward to your future customers, basically on the front lines, right? Which is sales, which is setters and closers, right? So please do not just hire based on energy, hire based on proof, right? Tangible proof. Now, again, the second thing that I see founders basically rely on is job boards such as, Indeed, LinkedIn, and so on and so forth. Top closers are not sitting around on these job boards. They are in network, right? That's where we hire a lot of our reps from, is in network, right? Or alternatively, right, these closers know their value, right? They are not going to be hiding around on LinkedIn, Indeed, because why? They're going to be scooped up into the next position so damn quickly that the chances of you finding a really good closer on a job board is very, very slim. Are they there? Absolutely. However, it's very rare to find a really good closer on a job board. Now, the third mistake I see founders do is that they don't test for actual closing skills, right? They're not reviewing past calls. They're not going through, tech stack familiarity, right? They're not going to be testing once they have gone through training. Don't just throw them out to the wolves, right? Get your top objections, right? And again, run your sales transcripts that you currently have through GPT, ask GPT for the best objections or the hardest objections you've gotten, and then throw them at your new closer. This is so important, right? Because here at Sales Match, we solve that with full vetting from A to Z. We do objection testing, and we also do role play based selection, right? But the most important part here is the vetting process. You have to vet properly, right? You have to call ex-employers, you have to look at past KPIs, you have to look at past positions, right? This is so important, right? Because at the end of the day, you need reps who match your offer, right? Your buyer and your price point. Why? Because otherwise they'll underperform from day one and they'll cost you a bunch of money, right? Now, let's hop into the third thing that I want to talk to you about, which is KPIs, right? And we're actually want to track the things that drive revenue, right? I cannot tell you how many times in the past, I'm very guilty of this, of over tracking things, right? Where you just have so much data, you don't know what to do with it. And at the end of the day, too much data becomes confusing and then you never look at the data in the first place. I'm talking to my old self here, right? So always remember that simplicity scales, right? Look at the KPIs that you actually need to make a decision on and then track those. And I'll give them to you right here, right? Now, your sales team should be measured on these specific KPIs. Show up rate, right? Now, a lot of times, this goes hand in hand, right? Because when I say here your sales team, what I mean by that is it's your setters and your closers, right? So your setter should have a specific show up rate, right? And if you have your leads that come through basically come through automatically through your funnel, and again, if you're over a 70% show up rate, I don't recommend that your setter engages with leads that are currently coming through the call funnel and booking automatically, right? Those leads that are already booked on the calendar. Your closer should be engaging with them. That means your closer is responsible for the show up rate of those leads if a setter did not engage them, okay? Now, the next thing that goes without saying here, you got to track your close rate. You also got to track cash collected, right? How much cash is actually collected, right? Because at the end of the day, you could have a closer that has, a higher close rate, but does not bring in as much cash, right? And a real good example of this is, for example, a closer can have a close rate of 20%, right? And another closer can have a close rate of 10%, right? However, that closer that has the close rate of 10%, if that closer has a faster sales cycle, right, which means that specific closer can take more and handle more calls on a monthly basis, on a yearly basis, they're going to be collecting more cash, right? Which at the end of the day, that's what matters, is how much cash are you collecting in a monthly basis and yearly basis, right? Close rate is all good and well, but cash collected is extremely important because that is literally the driving blood of your business, right? Now, again, the other thing that we just talked about is your sales cycle length. In my opinion, this is the number one kind of KPI you have to look at, is your sales cycle. Over and above, the close rate, cash collected, yes, is very much up there and very, very, very important. And I actually think these are probably both that we'll share the podium here, cash collected and sales cycle. But sales cycle is one KPI that I haven't heard of another business that really tracks this super accurately, right? And I ask founders all the time, what is your sales cycle like? And they'll say, roughly about 30 days, roughly about 2 weeks, roughly about 45 days. You gotta know exactly how long your sales cycle is per closer, right? Because that directly affects how many calls they can handle, and that directly affects about how much cash they can collect on a yearly basis, right? Super important. Now, the next thing we want to track here is your scheduled to closed ratio, which is self-explanatory, and then your follow-up velocity, right? Are your closers following up? Are your setters following up? Or are they just giving up on leads, right? And the reason we track this is to see basically, if closers actually give a shit about your leads, right? Which is so important, because the worst thing is that you do not want basically a closer that doesn't care about your leads. They just think that, leads are just falling from the sky, they're free leads, and there's an infinite amount of leads, they're always going to be the same quality, and then they waste those leads, right? There's nothing more frustrating than that, right? Because most founders don't even know their team's metrics, right? And then they wonder why sales are inconsistent, right? You have to make sure you track these things on a daily basis. It's super, super important. But anyway, moving on. Let's look at the fourth kind of pillar here, which is kind of your weekly tactical and scorecard driven training, right? Because training is super, super, super important. And I'm going to say this again very lightly, right? Because you'll come to find, right, and I've run into this in the past as well, that your top closers, if they are exceeding KPI, they don't want training, right? They're gonna feel like they're gonna they are being micromanaged. So training specifically is going to be when you onboard reps at the beginning, or for reps that are underperforming or under KPI. If you have reps that are at KPI or above KPI, weekly sales training is not necessarily needed. However, weekly sales meetings will be required, okay? Because again, you have to maintain, the team morale, the team culture, especially if you're, running an online-based businesses like a lot of you watching this are, right? It's so important that we maintain a good team culture. We're not walking into office, shaking hands, looking each other in the eye. The way we do that in this online space, right, is by having, daily meetings, right? We have an end of day, a beginning of the day huddle, and potentially an end of day huddle as well. We share successes, we share losses, we share information, right? That is what a good team looks like, right? Now, again, real sales team train like athletes, super important, right? They are super analytical. They know their data, they know what to look out for, right? And they prepare, right? They look at their own sales calls. Even top reps have to review their own sales calls to see where they're going wrong so that they can improve, right? You always want a rep that wants to improve. You do not want a rep that just stays comfortable in the same position, right? Now, again, we have talked about this briefly, but weekly call reviews is mandatory for anybody under KPI or that is in the ramp up period. And then also live objection drills. This also applies for the same thing that I just mentioned. Everybody that is under KPI, right, or in onboarding needs live objection drills. And then also one-on-one reviews with your manager, not specifically you as the founder, right? Because again, if you don't have a sales manager, we can help you find a sales manager as well if you're looking for that, link down below. However, you as a founder should not really be doing call reviews with your sales guys. I would say, again, if you're under $50,000 a month in revenue, that is okay, right? Because at that level, right, it is okay to basically be the founder and the sales manager, because you're wearing so many hats at once. You're probably the marketer. You're probably, the billing department as well. You're probably you're probably still taking sales calls at that point in time as well, right? Maybe even setting your own calls, right? There's so many hats that you're wearing, so it is okay. However, in order to scale, you have to remove yourself from that position. Now, again, your reps should know how to handle money objections, right? They should know this. They should know how to frame decision timelines, right? And the way to do this is basically just to ask the darn lead or the prospect you're talking with, right? That is, it's basically, great reps, you'll realize there's no shame involved, because at the end of the day, what they're doing is they're consulting the person that they're working with. And if the closer really believes that they have a product or service that can actually tangibly help the prospect that they're talking with, it is their duty to convey the value that they have in their product or service to the prospect that they're talking with, right? So they have to be able to frame decision timelines, and the way they do this is just to ask, right? If the lead's name, for an example, is, Olivia, ask her, right? Olivia, would it be fair if we made a decision in 2 weeks from now, August 14th or whatever the date is, right? Just so we can make sure we are working on track and working towards a decision here, right? If they agree to that, great. Now you have a timeline of when they're going to make a decision by, and you have to keep them accountable to that as well, right? Now, the other thing that great reps should know how to do is basically re-engage no-shows. And the way to do this, guys, is to always lead with value. I cannot tell you, you never want to send a message to a lead basically just saying, oh, just following up, just checking in, right? No, you always lead with value. Look at what you're selling, right? If you're selling, a coaching offer, right? For an example, look at some of the free, maybe if you're putting out good content, right? Maybe send them a good piece of content, or maybe review their business, right? Maybe see if they've made any progresses, right? Reach out and congratulate them on any progresses that they have made, or find any news articles that is pertinent to their business, their industry, or your product that can potentially help them, and re-engage those leads with value, right? Don't always just say, oh, just reaching out, just checking in. You're not going to get a response that way, right? And now the final thing that your rep should know how to do is protect your margin, right? You don't want a rep that just always gives a discount just to get the deal done, right? Because at the end of the day, right, they should close at full price, which is so important, right? You do not want reps, and I've had this in the past where, reps just basically, they always give a discount, right? When at the end of the day, there's a vast majority of those people that they would have closed without having to give them a discount. So this is so important that we remember all of these things and actually implement all of these things within our sales organization, right? Because again, now the final thing that we're going to move into here after training is your team culture, okay? Because at the end of the day, one thing that you got to remember as a founder is that you don't need friends in business, okay? You need killers, right? And high performance doesn't always feel warm, but it's effective, okay? You have to be there. You're not here to make friends in your business. You can go do that in your personal life. You're here in business to make money and help people, okay? Now, again, 7-figure and 8-figure teams are built around these 4 kind of core concepts, right? Which is high standards, brutal clarity, clear roles and outcomes, and mutual respect. No ego involved, okay? That's super important. Mutual respect is huge, right? Especially in sales and dealing with sales personalities, right? And most importantly, your team trusts the system more than their gut. That is so important, that they understand the system very well, they use the system very well, and they trust the system, right? Because again, a 7 and 8-figure sales team isn't just about hiring better reps. It's about building a system that produces consistent outcomes no matter who's in the seat. And again, if you are looking for proven closers or setters, that's exactly what we do here at Sales Match. We go out, we go find the very best closers or setters that matches your exact offer, and then we go ahead and interview them, vet them, call ex-bosses, do all of that, and then we provide you with the cream of the crop candidates. So if you're interested in that, the link's down below. Book a call. You might chat with me. I'm helping to calls now and again. But other than that, I really hope this video helped you, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.